Morning. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Monday, April 15th, 2024. It's 10:02 a.m. My name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board. To my left is Vice Chair Commissioner Fournier, Commissioner Klaus to his left, and then Commissioners Edwards and Mejia on Zoom. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. We're in session until noon today, if needed, with three different topic items. The first one is WSAC Legislative Steering Committee priorities. And County Manager, where are we at with this?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks so much. Thanks for the session that we had last week, and I appreciate Rob and Robin's work from that session until today. We have a couple of documents that we wanted to go over with you. The 2025 Legislative Priorities document and then the WSAC LSC ideas. I think where we'll start with your concurrence, Chair, is to have Rob's go over the process to submit to WSAC, give a general overview for the commissioners, and then we can talk about some of the prioritization that we think needs to take place. That's good.
So good morning, commissioners. Hopefully Commissioner Mejia and Commissioner Edwards, I'm not sure if you received the document electronically, but we did have printed hard copies for folks here in the office. Brandy.
Sorry, I posted them to the master calendar so that they could see them. Okay,
great. So if commissioners, if online, can look at the master calendar, and we'll be able to see the updated 2025 WSAC LSC ideas document.
Unless you want it on the screen.
I might actually try to zoom in and see if I can pull it up on the screen. But while I'm doing that, had the opportunity to take the document that you went through last week of doing sort of the list of potential items, and then tried to the best of my ability to flesh those out a little bit over the weekend.
How do we do?
Pardon?
How do we do?
You did great.
Yeah,
There's
right.
a lot of wonderful ideas. But this morning, once I get it up, we can go through some of those and probably fill in some of the holes that I might have in terms of my understanding of what the issues are. But also knowing that this is the week that by Friday we need to have, and I provided at each one of your places a copy of the submittal application that each one of the items that the board would like to bring forward to LSC has to be submitted on Friday. So for each one of these ideas that we have, we'll need to translate that into this application and get it out by the end of the week.
So commissioners, in the interest of time and looking at the fact that it's a multi-page application that Rob will have to be filling out, it would be great if we could get the top 4 or 5. There's no real magic number, but to get that focused in so that Rob knows which items he can prepare those applications for and to submit. So that's our suggestion and recommendation.
So this was a stab at like our local and our shared regional, but that overlaps, but isn't exactly the same as what might be a good proposal for LSC.
Correct.
And so is that this bigger packet that
Well, the bigger
LSC
packet,
possibilities?
yes, the bigger packet takes into account everything on the list that was under that column for potential WSAC items.
We have one of those.
So I don't think you've got the list.
Okay, I will open
But
that.
that's what we pulled off the board. And remember, we had 3 buckets.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of overlap,
Yeah.
but pretty much what was in each bucket was only in that bucket. So this is the WSAC bucket. This is the Thurston County bucket. And we haven't started on the regional shared priority.
But we need to pick, you're proposing we need to pick 4 or 5 items from
for
this.
WSAC.
Yes.
For the WSAC
And
submission.
so that's the task today.
Right, that Rob can then flesh out in each one will have one of these.
Okay,
Can we bring the board?
yeah, this is thicker. Can you pull up that document?
Yes, I
I
am.
think we erased the
Well, this is
board.
a summary of
I
the
just
whiteboard.
walked by
I
and
think.
it wasn't.
Oh, is it all still on the? Yeah,
Hit
I'm in
save,
the board.
hit save on the whiteboard.
There we go.
Oh, that works, yeah.
Yeah, that's basically.
So this is basically, let me try to zoom in a little bit. So this is basically the compilation from the whiteboard, which identifies the potential WSAC LSC items. There's a column per your conversation where there was a translation
Can't see it.
of the items that were circled on that prioritization list, those that were actually crossed out, and then the items for the region and the county. So thanks to Brandy for capturing this. So that's what we are working off of. So the document that I'll pull up next is really trying to flesh out those WSAC LSC items and hopefully have a conversation. O and X are related to the work that was done on the board. So the O captures those items that were circled, and the X's, or actually the red cross-outs, were the tort reform and the EMS licensing certification. So those were crossed out on the board prior from your discussion, and that's how it was translated
The
onto
circles what the circles meant was sort of our preliminary top.
preliminary top priorities is, I would just.
Okay, got it.
The discussion was, these are things that folks started to bring, to concur on, but there wasn't a final decision made as to a certain list.
So looking at the green and the circles, that's conservation futures funding, I think that should say, for the purchase of water rights.
Correct.
Public defense funding and park impact fee, M&O,
Right.
flexibility.
Right. So those, and I can bring up the other document. Let me stop sharing that.
Public defense, I'm sure WSAC's gonna be all over that. The other two are, we might be the only ones promulgating the other two.
Right, and I think that's part of the conversation for the board this morning is if we are trying to, if the board is trying to hone this down to a handful of items, are there items on the list that likely will already be part of the LSC discussion and potential prioritization? And so if you look at this in terms of the property tax cap of the 1%, as well as public defense funding, those will be part of the mix. I mean, they have been and they will, especially with caseload standards. There's no way that they won't be part of the legislative priorities for the coming year. So it's really looking at what are those other items of import to the board specifically that you would like to bring forward for consideration by the LSC. And no, in terms of this legislative, and I apologize to Commissioner Mejia and Edwards, I don't have this in an easily pulled up electronic format in terms of the proposal submission form for WSAC. But part of it, of what they're asking for, and I think this is in response to a lot of the conversations that have unfolded recently with King County, Pierce, and Snohomish about the feeling like that urban legislative agenda is not receiving broad support by all of the counties and thus membership and all of those issues, which I'm sure you're aware of. They are asking for additional information about, is this an urban, rural, or an all-county priority? Would this be, how does it fit into the existing statement of policy? So if it already is kind of covered with an umbrella of the legislative steering priorities, then it's probably more easily adapted onto the legislative agenda. If it's something entirely new, that could be an uphill battle, but they also want to know who are the likely supporters, who are the likely opposers of it. And when you talk about park impact fees, knowing that our board has in the past put that forward as a priority item when looking at there's such limited funding outside of the general fund to support maintenance and operations of our parks. Is there some flexibility that could be had with the park impact fees, similar to conservation futures, where it allows for a certain amount of maintenance and operation funding to come from that revenue source? But at the same time, that was one of those that had a fair amount of pushback from the builders and the construction community, because they really wanted to see those resources, as we hear often, whether it's transportation, parks, et cetera. The focus really tends to be on that growth, paying for growth, as opposed to maintenance operations, which we know on the day-to-day basis is a challenge, because you just can't keep expanding without some ability to be able to fund it. So knowing that going into this will be one of those items that will be probably discussed as the LSC is talking about these items. Or Commissioner, you're on the LSC, correct? And Commissioner Mejia is the alternate. So it'll be probably the need at that retreat to really be able to talk about the topics as well. So we can always, whatever the board hones in on. Focuses on.
May I
We
ask
can-
a question?
Yes.
So WSAC, just like the individual jurisdictions, will be trying to whittle their legislative agenda down to the most important few things. If we already know that increasing the cap on the property tax and funding public defense are going to be items that are on their agenda, about how much room is there gonna be for everybody to get their other things on the list? Do you have a sense of that?
So I think I can't project really what the process will be, as I won't be part of it. Having been part of it in the past, generally there will be some conversation, most likely, about what are those items that where the LSC is taking a proactive stance and actually pushing it out as an idea, as opposed to reactive, and looking for opportunities to introduce some of these ideas as well. So it's a little bit of both. So the property tax cap may not make their top 4 or 5, but it doesn't mean that it won't be worked on, because it's within the policy statement. So if someone in the legislature actually then drops legislation to address that, then WSAC would sort of have the opportunity to get on board there without having to make it one of their priorities, if that makes sense. All that to say, if the board would like to have an opportunity to go through this list, I took a stab at trying to define what the need is and provide a little bit of a background statement. I have not done the crosswalk yet for all of how it fits with the WSAC policy statement, but I will do that for whatever items the board would like to submit in terms of an application. So we can quickly walk through this in terms of what I have, if that would be helpful. Or do you want to just briefly talk about each one of the priority areas and whether or not it seems to like it would be our focus or something that's probably already a joint focus? That might help us winnow it down a bit.
And Rob, thank you for working on this
Certainly.
time that we had the last meeting to today.
Over the weekend.
Sure. You do a little weeding, you do a little LSC stuff. So when it comes to conservation futures or the utilization of conservation futures for water rights, that is something that probably has not been discussed yet within the legislative steering committee or even in the county realm per se. We know, several years ago, kind of dealing with the Hearst decision and the Hearst fix, and water access, water rights has definitely been moving up in a a level of importance to the jurisdictions, but whether or not they've talked about funding sources to acquire water rights, I don't know if that has occurred. It's just one of those ideas that's bubbled up here locally, and more because we've have the possibility of acquisition of water rights from TransAlta. And so, I mean, it's kind of bubbled up as an issue, but I think it's one that potentially could have broad interest, potentially by other counties. The utilities, I'll just go down to the circled items. The next one being public defense funding. That will be an item on the LSC and something that they're working on regardless of us submitting something.
So does that mean we shouldn't submit it because it's a waste of one of our cards?
No, because they said you can submit as many as you'd like, and they've made that offer to all of the affiliates as
Is it
well.
worth even filling out the form if it's, I don't know, I mean, we know it's gonna
Maybe
be.
pencil whip that one.
I think in terms of the level of effort, I could probably pull that together fairly quickly. It may not be as robust of details, but it probably doesn't need to. It won't suffer from not being fully fleshed out, because it will pop up for sure. But I think what we can offer is we're having a conversation with Patrick in a little bit that we can be able to then share our own specific kind of projections about what the caseload standards will be doing and the impact financially. So we could customize it a little bit. We'll be sharing that information anyway, but it's another vehicle for doing that. And let's see, funding for parks, M&O fees. Oh, we've talked about that, so
We have, and we specifically have a letter from when we were discussing this item in 2019, 2020, from the Olympia Master Builders, stating what their objections are. So if we go forward with this either to WSAC or at a county level, we'll have very clear information on the barriers that we need to overcome or attempt to overcome with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
and it also helps to outline, I think, part of our conversation, as the board finalizes our 2025 legislative priorities moving forward, hopefully, by that June timeframe, it can help lay out sort of what's the interim strategy between now and December. Are there conversations to be held with prospective opponents or potential opponents to the ask of doing that education, looking at other folks that might be supporters of it and trying to build those alliances going into it. So there's plenty of work that could happen between now and then as well. But as Robin said, there is a reality that we need to go in with our eyes wide open. With that, those were the three that had been circled and can easily craft a submission proposal for those if the board is supportive of that.
Yep, I was, one of the ones that's on two lists is the animal services, and it's on the WSAC list there, and I guess I'm just wondering, Wayne hasn't been on there that long, but maybe I'll ask Carolina, and Commissioner Mejia, does anyone at WSAC ever talk about animal services and funding? Is this, would this have do we have any sense of whether this would be, this could really help a lot of jurisdictions, but do we have any sense of this, if there's any interest in this beyond ourselves?
So in follow-up to our conversation during the last legislative session, there is work that will be happening in the interim. So I think keeping it on the county's list as a priority, not necessarily the WSAC list. As you may recall, Deborah worked with Representative Berg and another representative as part of the Fur Fighters Caucus. And so they are looking to do They're looking to run some trap lines during the interim, specifically to understand what amount of revenues the state receives from animal product sales, you know,
So how much they'd be willing to kick back?
potentially doing some of that and potentially that first ask being more around a study. One was not funded, but queuing up enough information to bring back to the legislature in the next biennium, a request to kind of study it prior to doing probably some type of funding source. So, and maybe one that we can continue to focus on as a county priority and not utilize that as one of our WSAC one. But if it gets traction as a proviso, then definitely ask for WSAC support in that.
Is the board comfortable with that? Taking it off the WSAC?
I mean, I've done, three of us have done I served there for, I think, 2 years. It's like that policy document is worth looking at because they spent a lot of time on that policy document. And it's trying to lay out the parameters that we can all agree on so that there's kind of like guidance for these different proposals. You know, the ones that are highly politically contentious are, you know, probably not the best ones for, you know, the WSAC, you know, so looking at things that are, you know, like the conservation futures one, to me, that could be helpful. I don't see political, I mean, there's always somebody that's got a counter argument, but it doesn't seem to be that kind of inflammatory political issue that would be, you know, a big impediment to moving it forward on LSC's agenda, potentially. So that's, I think, you know, one to work, I think that's a good one to look at. I thought animal one might be similar to that, but especially since it's a state holdback. It's not a new tax, that was my understanding.
And I guess to be more clear, I think it's a timing issue for that one. Because we have representatives that are doing work in the interim, that we may not have a specific proposal to make right now. And once they've had an opportunity to do that or get funding for a study, then we'll have a proposal that we can get on. Maybe it'll work faster than I anticipate, but usually
Anyway.
they have to fund something before a study.
All that I was just saying, I guess I was just saying is like, when we go through this exercise, like, I personally am looking for I'm looking for the most important issue to us that doesn't have that like really contentious political component. Like that's what I'm kind of searching for, because those are the ones I think that are our best options to throw to WSAC.
Something we can get movement on.
Something we can get movement on, get support, like that all the counties can stand together and say, hey, legislator, you might not have thought about this, but it would really help us. And we're all united. When you have a divided vote, it doesn't seem like all that work doesn't help all that much. Right? I mean, am I wrong? I mean, if the LSC is divided 50-50 or 55-45, I don't think that really helps us with the legislature versus an issue where we are mostly in agreement. Using the WSAC, you know, apparatus. That's what it's for, is to
Unless you're
illuminate
trying to push
issues that
something.
the state would not see because they're not on the ground with us at county level. So I don't know which ones, I'm just sharing this as that's my mental filter in terms of figuring out which ones of these we should fill out the
Do
application.
the three that we circled on Friday fit that description to you?
I think they do.
I kind of think they do too.
What else is the question, if anything?
Are you ready to go battle it out?
Yeah. Ready for war.
And just as an FYI, I'll be there at the LSC retreat with Commissioner Fournier, just as backup as he needs me.
Bob, do you have enough detail on the three that are circled to get working on those
I do.
submissions? Perfect.
I mean, I'm looking at the other ones, tax, probably not gonna, you know, the utility tax, the property cap, I guess there's that one about utilities out to facilities. EMS, we took that off. So then we had the behavioral health rates, which we wanted to kind of get more information, which may not be timely enough. I don't know how quickly we can get the information we were looking for.
Yeah, is it just a funding issue in terms of the level of the reimbursement rates? Because I think the approach will be different, because if it's just a funding piece, we'd have to work it through the budget process versus a legislative fix. I don't know what we're fixing.
So I'm in agreement with the, I'm so blind, but the public defense funding, I do agree that I feel like we can do something else with that one, because I feel like that is going to be a priority regardless of what we submit. Just because it's been, of course, just highly talked about. So
You're recommending an additional one?
yeah, but, sorry, I have to,
No, come on down.
walk to the board. I guess for me, I would recommend, it's always a hard one, but the property tax is the more than 1%. I mean, it's been an issue of discussion for past couple of years. I think it's still going to be something that we need to continue to discuss at the WSAC level. So that would be my recommendation, is for that one. Or a discussion with animal services would be my second option, but.
I think I'm with you on those, both of those.
So we can,
So we're talking about changing out the public defense funding for either property tax or the animal. What's that one?
Animal services funding.
Services funding?
Which one do you feel more passionate about? You're gonna be speaking on it.
well, the public defense funding has the potential to be, cost a lot more than what say if we talk 3% versus a 1% cap,
Which is
is not going to touch
$900,000.
the cost increases of the public defense expenditure need.
So Rob, did we see a note from you that the Supreme Court's gonna fast track it?
Yes, so thank you for that reminder. So I just learned last week that Justice Gonzalez is looking to fast track the caseload standards. So we thought it would have been a much longer time frame before they adopted them, but they're looking to actually move that forward. And so they did an en banc last Thursday, and where they basically, the entire Supreme Court meets together to talk about what they will bring or consider, et cetera. They are
Speak of the devil.
looking to do another one in May, and potentially make a decision about the timeline of implementation. So it could mean that it may or may not follow the same phasing. It could happen a lot sooner. So that remains to be seen. It looks like that will happen, that horse has left the barn.
I would just like to know how this is gonna, there's us, there's the state, there's the Supreme Court and caseload standards, like, how does it all fit? Like, the Supreme Court adopts the standards, that becomes mandated. Legislature says, we don't have any money for this, counties, you can pay for that. We don't have any money for it, so we don't comply. Then what happens? We get sued, the county gets sued by by, I mean, what happened? Like, this can't all happen in that, like, in that hypothetical, right? Like, we don't get money, we can't comply.
So it does fall to, I think, in part, the reason why the WSAC case was dismissed around standing, right, was, I think it opens it up for another approach in terms of trying to hold the state accountable for the funding, but it will have to take the approach of some type of a class action where you're looking at defendants who are willing to join. So it's, coordinated probably by ACLU or something like that. We're only speculating, but the Supreme Court is not going to compel, or it doesn't really have a means to compel the legislature per se, unlike McCleary in educational funding. So we are sort of in this no person's land.
Yeah, it feels like it.
And so it's going to have to, unfortunately, it feels like it's going to have to get bad before it can get better. But,
So where are we?
We are at conservation futures, purchase of water rights.
And there's two interests in property tax, more than 1%, and then the animal funding. Tax fee to support animals.
So we're doing the animals, did you say? Is
Yeah,
the other one that's
the
gonna
tax
go?
slash fee,
So is
well, there's two folks
So
that
we're
are.
crossing out public defense funding, what is
So
conservation?
No, we're
I
gonna
put
do a light
We'll
proposal.
just do,
Light.
we support the statewide emphasis on
Yeah,
funding, and by the way, here's how much Thurston County needs. So that'd go forward that way. You decided to not go forward for the public facilities outside the UGA on the WSAC list, is that what we're saying? No to that one? Yes to the property tax, where else are we going here?
Yeah, property tax was one that there were two
because it's
interests.
gonna be there no matter what, is
Right.
that what we're saying?
So we're gonna do that.
So that's
We're gonna
four.
say, so that means no to the rural ADUs.
We were,
Already taken.
Commissioner Edwards was gonna be given an opportunity to kind of state his case, was that?
Right, that was what was discussed.
We're saying no to the B&O and utility taxes for now, no for now.
It could be, if I make a suggestion, that we could put that together with the property tax caps and sort of couch it as, fiscal,
Find a solution, here's some options.
fiscal,
is
yeah,
that-
opportunities
Good idea, Rob.
that and sort of just roll them together into one. Because
an
it
option.
won't take much explanation
Okay,
for B&O or
That's a good
utility.
approach.
you got 2 for 1 right there,
There you go.
Two for what? Two for
Logo,
deal. Gotta love it.
starting Monday out right.
Commissioner Edwards, you came off mute there, and at the last meeting, we knew that you were a proponent of rural ADUs, so we kept it on the list, just so that, it didn't get lost. Did you want to speak to that?
Can you hear me okay? I'm trying something different today.
Perfectly well.
Oh, okay, good. No, I'm kind of in your camp, I guess, with your explanation on how we ought to move forward here. And I'm not locked in on any one thing. I think they're all important. We're really going to address housing. I do think we need it. We got a democratic process here, and I'm with you.
Thanks, sir.
So we got the conservation futures for water rights. We're gonna combine property taxes and the utilities and B&O into that need fiscal,
Flexibility.
fiscal flexibility and tools in our toolbox. We're gonna move forward how to support animal services. And we're gonna do the impact fee M&O
Yes.
That one's gonna take a whole lot of stakeholder work.
Okay, so we have 4?
4.5, because we have the light one.
Yeah.
Well, plus the
Yeah, we're
public
gonna
defense light. Yeah,
support-
that-
Add them all.
I think that's enough.
I think it is too.
Does that work for everybody? I mean,
But I think, just to not drop, I think some of them, like the hospital, certificate of need, that's easy enough to have a conversation with the SALFO, about some of those as well, so that it's on radar screens, whether it's about, reimbursement rates or just the arcane nature of the CON.
And then we'll take this, right? And then if, and Carolina was saying that if anybody else brings up anything else and maybe their top priority is hospital certifications, then this kind of gives us the ability to speak in favor of and say it made the county's short list.
And so I will then take that list and put it into this format for submission and make sure that the board has all of the applications that are done by Friday. Sound good?
You clear, Rob, on what you need?
Okay.
Got it.
Lighter than mud, yes.
Little less.
Oh, it's good. Yep. But thank you. I appreciate the refinement of the list. And we'll make sure it gets done by Friday.
And then the other thing in your packet is, we've got time for this, but, it is the first draft, so please give edits on this and we'll keep it going.
Another thank you to Robin for working on this since the last meeting.
Not a whole lot of work when a lot of it is a continuation of what we're already planning, but please update.
okay, you ready to go to the next topic then?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, public defense team. Next up is discussion about public defense caseload standards, follow-up discussion. We have Director of Public Defense Patrick O'Connor here with his team. And
Glad we came over, we were waiting on it. Got through your agenda quicker.
Did you just get back from somewhere?
Yes.
Oh, wow, fancy.
Okay, thank you. Great. Oh, let me. Okay, well, good morning, Commissioners. Patrick O'Connor, Director of Thurston County Public Defense. What should be in front of you is what's being presented on our PowerPoint screen. And before I get into it, just introduce Katie Venna, our Executive Assistant to my left.
Never met her.
Tita Davis, Administrative Service Manager to her left. And then on the call is Jose Vargas, our Fiscal Manager, joining us remotely. There's probably going to be a lot of questions. I don't expect us to have all the answers here this morning. But let me start by way of a little bit of background from our two prior briefings on the changes in public defense and what we were anticipating and what we have here today. So WSAC sent out last week a statewide public defense calculator for implementation of new standards. We will get to those, Commissioner Mejia, in a second.
That's fine.
Cut to the bluff, to the chase. So Washington Association of Counties sent out a implementation calculator statewide. Received that last week. I was out of the office on vacation and got to work on completing the estimations earlier week before last is when they sent out the calculator. And I'll talk a little bit about our process and how we developed the data to give what we're calling at this point rough estimates of expense. So with that, sort of happy to dive into the spreadsheet. Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. So, well, let me start here with the basic instructions and how we put together the estimates. So essentially what we were looking at is trying to capture case assignments to Thurston County Public Defense in 2023 in all divisions within our department. And following the instructions to a T. So looking at all the adult felony cases that the court assigned to our office, all our, by adult cases, that includes both adult felonies and adult misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors in both our district and superior courts. And then also our juvenile justice system and our juvenile clients. In addition to that, we were looking at staff that provide the direct representation in criminal matters. We do have a number of staff that we excluded from these calculations that are doing collateral consequence work, things like legal financial obligation work, Blake team, Oka team. So we have several staff that we pulled out of the calculation. So if you're looking at our total number of FTEs for our department compared to what you'll see in that we use in the calculus, they're going to be less because those really didn't apply. Also, of course, administrative staff, et cetera, in our office that weren't really, the purpose of this calculator. So we did our best, and I think one of the things I can tell you that directors around the state have struggled with in completing this task, because they've all received the same directive from their local county commissioners to complete the spreadsheet. With these changes, this is something that we weren't really prepared in terms of data collection to be able to easily produce, right? So these new standards have a variety of new definitions of cases, et cetera, and just historically, we haven't captured that type of data. So I put a big caveat on these numbers to say that we did our best. I think these estimates are low, but part of that is because we weren't really set up to collect certain data points that they were asking for. So, okay. Well, let me pause. Are there any immediate questions?
Patrick, for my benefit, can you give me a quick overview
Sure.
of the situation that brought us to this calculator?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Leonard. So the Washington State Public Defense has had statewide standards since 2012. And the American Bar Association conducted a national study of caseloads for public defenders and produced a report and recommendations. And the State Bar Association and the Council on Public Defense, which is a branch of state government that exclusively focuses their work on caseloads and standards for public defense, reviewed those findings and made recommendations. And it basically lowered the caseloads across the board for all public defense cases. And so the Washington State Bar Association just voted to adopt these standards. That happened about 6 weeks ago, and the legislative process is the Board of Governors has adopted the new standards sent on to the state Supreme Court, which meant Rob sent out an email. They met en banc 2 weeks ago.
Well, last Thursday.
Last Thursday. And they're forwarding this on to their Rules Committee, and they'll probably approve these next month. Yeah, so.
And just to also, per our county code, we adopt the Washington State Bar Association.
Correct. Yes.
Caseload standards as well.
Yes, so we have a local ordinance that adopts the standards. We're required to comply with state standards of public defense. We'll be updating those ordinances, obviously, sometime this year in light of these new developments. So, yeah, my responsibility as the Administrator of Public Defense is to ensure that we're compliant with the state standards. Okay. Moving right ahead. So what you'll see here is a cost roll-up, which, based on the calculations of the numbers that we had in cases, these are the expenses that we forecast for Thurston County Public Defense to implement the standards. So I'll pause for a second because, again, what the standards are contemplating is a 3-year implementation to get to full compliance. I think obviously there's a recognition that with the expenses that we're looking at and the number of staff, that it's gonna take at least 3 years to implement. And the recommendation for implementation starts in July of 2025 and then fully implemented in the following 2 years.
That timeline, is that mandated? Is that like a prescribed timeline, or is that like, that's our best case scenario?
That's
or-
the prescribed timeline for counties and municipalities to come into compliance. Yes.
Patrick, could you help, or maybe Jose can help us put this into
Sure.
context? How much is the current budget for public defense?
So it's a little over 8 million with the 400,000 reduction for this year. We were at 8.5. So I think that puts us around 8.1. Jose could correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Current budget is 8.1 million.
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, that
Sorry.
includes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was having problems unmuting myself. It's actually $8.8 million, including the special programs.
So, right, so the special, we received additional funding for the OCLA program that provides the collateral relief, so, you know,
NGRI, Blake. Yeah.
NGRI, so not guilty by reason of insanity program, that's funded by state OPD, and again, that work is sort of separate and apart from this work. So we'd have to pull back some of that budget because of these other programs.
Bottom line, it's gonna be a doubling, 100 to 150% increase in your budget needed to fully implement by 2028.
Roughly, yes. Again, that's based on, and I'll walk through how I went about completing this calculus. And again, it's rough. It is imperfect, to be candid.
And it's most likely on the low.
It's most likely on the low end.
My question, if we have a low and a high, you're saying that even the high is
Yeah.
The
relatively
high is
low?
low.
The high is low.
So, yeah, well, so if you look at the low, high end here, what they asked us to do, which makes sense, is take a range of FTEs on salaries, right? So low starting salary to high starting salary based on what that FTE would be doing. So that's why you see the low and high, because of course we never know
Just
where,
the salary range.
that's just the salary range. So we
So
really
it's
don't
pretty-
know.
So if I'm out in the community just talking about this at a high level, and I say it's probably gonna mean 150% increase, like that's a fair number to use.
Yes, yes. And again, it might be low.
It might be
too
low,
high, it could
but
be
just
100.
for a
Starting
round
point.
starting point, not unduly inflammatory, but a reasonable estimate of what this is gonna cost at a pretty conservative.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Most of the folks that attended the administrators conference last week were saying it was more likely a tripling of costs versus a doubling of costs.
I think that's fair. What we see now, again, are just our projections based on the data that I was able to put into the calculator. It's missing some pieces, and I'll sort of talk about that a little bit when we get into what the actual numbers are, because, again, I just did a snapshot of 2023. And in that 2023 assignment data, so as we assign cases every month across the teams, those are cases that are generated in 2023 with 2023 cause numbers. Now, it's not uncommon in our work that somebody is charged with a criminal offense in the preceding year. So in that example, 2022, they never appear in court, but they come back before the court 3-4 months later in 2023, let's say, and now they're assigned an attorney. And that's a lot of cases. That's not captured in this data because I don't have the ability to do that. So that's why I say that's just sort of an example of how imperfect the data that I was able to put in there. I'm very confident in the data that I did put in here that that's all 2023 cases. But that's why I say it's low, because there are dynamics to our work that are hard to capture. And again, it's not as though our data had this calculus in mind going into 2023. We really didn't know these standards were going to change and what the definition of cases were going to be and the case weight and all the things that we're seeing now. So certainly going forward, that's how we will start to set up our data collection. But, yeah, so the high-low scenarios here are based on FTEs and salary ranges for the FTEs based on the division.
Will you be able to see other counties, maybe a county that's comparable to us in caseload and size, and see what they're projecting to see if we're within?
I should be able to do that, yeah, yes, yeah. So I haven't had a chance to, again, like, I can tell you, my colleagues around the state are asking, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? Because again, none of us were really set up to do this. This took me personally last week, and Katie, we were hand counting cases because we really don't have a system or a staff member that, you know, we haven't designed our case management system to capture this data.
Sure.
We will work towards that end. Obviously, we're going to have to stay on top of this every year. But there's a significant amount of, in my opinion, data that's not being captured here, but again, we're not able to do that just yet. So maybe we'll take a look unless you have any other questions. But yeah, Commissioner Menzer, to your point, I think it's very fair to say that we will see at least 150% increase in public defense expenses. And I know Commissioner Mejia went right to that slide, and I saw her face, so.
That was the first place I looked when I got
I'm
this
sure it
from
was.
you. So again, just trying to get my head around how we counted the cases.
Yeah.
You took the known cases from last year, 2023 cases only. That did not account for cases that might come forward from a prior year. And you used that flat throughout the years with no projected growth in caseload, even though we know that this is not a relatively high caseload year, and with population growth is going to come caseload growth.
Correct, yeah, those are all assumptions that
Are not
not included in this. I'm not doing any projections into future years of
Right.
caseload growth. Caseload growth will obviously impact the need, but again, you know, we're coming out of the pandemic, right? So, you know, in 2019, we saw very similar numbers to our office workload as we saw in 2023, but you have to take out 20, 21, and 22 because everything was low because of COVID, right? And so we're tracking, we just went through first quarter now. We're on sort of a very similar caseload track to 2023, but I didn't include 2024 numbers because it got
Trying to
even
get
more
it clean.
complicated, to be candid.
So again, that also speaks to the fact that these numbers are low,
They are low.
even on the high end.
I mean, if it's not even accounting the Prop 1, right, and the increase in staffing in the sheriff's
Right.
office, I mean, that's going to have an impact on this as well, and so so 150% is low.
Patrick, can you walk us through, when we submit this information, what's the process? Is it a binding number that they look at, or is it just an introductory number?
So I think my understanding of what, and I'll turn to Rob, I think what makes sense to me and what I'm picking up on is WSAC wants to get some general estimates across the state, right, as the county strategize on how to fund this. So, but I mean, Rob could probably speak to that, but I'm assuming that's what the effort is.
Correct. It was just an effort to try to have a systematic way of getting similar information from all counties.
Can we put, like, I mean, I'm assuming this information has already been submitted. I mean, did we put, or not yet?
We haven't forwarded it on to Juliana yet.
Can we put a note on there that says, like, this is not, this is basically a previous year, and this is kind of what we're basing our information on, and it's like a flat growth, and it does not take into account all the different aspects of Proposition 1, or just growth in population, or I think that just needs to be.
Or the pursuit law. I mean, there's 100 different things, right? So the policy changes, law changes, et cetera. Those are all very dynamic. Our work's dynamic to begin with. But I do, on that point, Commissioner, which is a really good point, is this doesn't capture all our expenses for the department, right? So if we're looking at adding 40 new staff, let's say, for example, Well, that's just at the trial court level. That's just at the attorney level. We, to be a successful department, would have to then increase some of our admin staff, right? So, yeah, you know, I can't run a department of 40, 50, 60 more staff members without increasing our admin team. And so none of that expense is captured in here, but it would be imperative for our office to be successful in implementing this by adding some key positions administratively to run a department that now just doubled their size. Like I can't, you know, to be successful. So that's not in here.
That's all backloaded in this, in
You've got
2028?
zeros and then 3 and 4 million.
Sorry, which number are we looking
The
at?
last row,
Right.
additional
So-
support staff costs.
Right, that's support staff, right? So the increase in, so the caseload changes to trial attorneys. The standards also require the trial attorneys be supported by legal assistants and paralegals, right? So if we grow the number of trial attorneys, you have to grow in step with the support staff. So when they're talking about support staff, they're talking about legal assistants and paralegals to support the lawyers and investigators and social workers. So that's all part of the standards. That's absent from, okay, if we have 50 new staff members, what do we need administratively to run the office, right?
You could have another row there for
I could-
admin, which is
absolutely.
separate than support.
Right, so it was outside the scope of the ask here, right, because they're just talking about, well, this calculator was set up to implement the standards, and the standards deal with trial attorneys, legal assistants, paralegal support, mitigation specialists or social workers, and investigators. So that's what these calculations are based on. They're not based on me saying, hey, I'm gonna need a chief deputy to run a 100-person office. Like I can't do it as a director. That's not included in this. We really need a business application technician to run all the software and all the issues with our office. That's not included in this expense. We probably need a support service manager to run all the new legal assistants and paralegals. So again, that wasn't my ask here, and I'm happy to work that up and get another estimate of expense to implement, because it's not capturing all the expense administratively for the department to actually implement the standards. It's addressing what our staff needs would be to do the work in the courtrooms, but it's not addressing all the needs, if that makes sense.
I would like to see all of the figures drawn up, like what the actual impact would be, and have those figures drawn in, because, well, maybe, you know, WSAC is not asking for it. I think we all need to have a realistic picture of, like, you know, 839 is low, and we should actually be expecting like double that, you know, to actually be the impact of this. So for me, I would like to see all of that mapped out.
We can certainly, we have a management team meeting this afternoon where I'm presenting this to our management team, and we've already talked internally about what that would also, what are those additional expenses would be, so I can get something over to you guys probably by Wednesday, because I believe there's a due date of this Friday to submit. Is that correct, Rob?
I think so.
A lot of due dates this Friday.
A lot
The
of due dates.
listening session with OPD on next Monday.
Yeah, and I'll be attending that.
I'll be with you on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to attend that as well if you need me to.
That would be great.
Yeah, if you can just send me the invite, I'll, happy to be a part of that.
Sounds like then there's two main footnotes. One is the dynamic nature of what you do, and this is more static, and that there's caseload increases that are not taken into this. Then the other one is the administrative/leadership overhead that's not included in this.
Correct. Yep. Yep. And you know, again, I understand that wasn't, you know, that wasn't WSAC's intent here. This was just simply a calculation of implementation of the caseloads as attorney and support staff ratios. But, you know, as the director, I'm seeing, okay, in addition to this, what are we going to need to, as a department to be successful?
Fully loaded.
Fully loaded. I mean, okay, we can move to the next step or the next slide. I don't know how much time we have, but,
You've got enough time. We have until 12. I mean,
oh, okay,
I mean, if we needed it, but
okay.
I don't know how much time. I would just point out for the county manager, WSAC sued the state for lack of funding in public defense. before all this was going on. Like, this is, our lawsuit was completely independent of this new caseload standard. So we were already, and we were thrown out for lack of standing, but we were already saying that we were constitutionally deficient level of funding from the state. And now we're looking at a scenario where it could be tripling the cost of what was already, from WSAC's perspective, constitutionally deficient funding.
That's staggering.
So it's really something that's all coming together.
The state only funds 4% of public defense costs.
We're 48th out of 50 states, and the other two are basically right where we are. So I mean, we're basically at the very bottom. Nobody funds no state funds less. There's a couple that are right where we are, but really no state funds less to public defense than Washington.
Isn't the statewide funding number around $6 million? That's for all counties, and if you.
5.8 million.
Yeah, and if
To
you
divide between
consider
39
that our
counties.
budget alone in a medium-sized county
Is 8 or 9
is
million.
almost 9 million.
Yeah.
That's,
Grossly inadequate.
Yeah.
What other states look like?
So, well, some states have full state public defense systems, so the delivery system is statewide. It's a statewide system run at the state level,
Alaska.
delivered at the local level, Alaska, Colorado, a variety of other states. It's done differently, sort of everywhere, but in terms of funding, for Washington State, it's disgraceful and has been for a long time. So I'll stick to the slides. I certainly have my opinions on,
good plan. Would you
Yeah.
also say though, Patrick, within the state of Washington, the 39 counties have a variety of ways?
they absolutely do. Yeah, public defense is delivered in Washington 50 different ways, right? So some counties have, of course, based on size, right? Some counties have nonprofit organizations that deliver public defense, like Snohomish County. They're a nonprofit. They're a county agency, but they're a nonprofit, but they have a delivery system that's just different. You can look to the middle of the state where all they do is contract public defense. They don't even have a brick and mortar public defender office. Then you have hybrids. And so, yeah, it's one of the challenges, in my opinion, of delivery of public defense and for State Office of Public Defense. But you're right, it is sort of, and that's when we talk about implementation across the state, it is 6 ways to Sunday on how folks are doing this work, right? And Okanagan County and sort of, you name the sort of smaller counties, populace-wise, that are delivering systems are much different than ours. We are better set up to make these changes than some of my colleagues around the state. They are really struggling with how they're going to do this. So the next slide, it's a very small one for me with my glasses, gives you a sort of a needs roll-up on FTEs based on our projections. So you can see the steady increase there. And so right now we have 21 eligible trial attorneys. Again, that's excluding some of our attorneys that do other work for the office. So you can see in 25, that number would need to go up to 28, 35 and 26, and 66 and 27. So a significant increase. And then again, in keeping in compliance with the standards, when you add attorneys, you have to add support staff based on the ratios that they've adopted.
So based on that number, from 21 to 66, how is it only showing a 100 to 150% increase? Like, that's more than tripling the number of your attorneys.
Expense-wise,
Yeah, like the previous slide that showed that it was,
yeah.
your $8 million budget would go to 13 million or at the high end, but the next slide, you're telling me that you're gonna more than triple the attorneys, so how is that fit?
It's a good question. I don't know how the Excel spreadsheet
Jose knows that.
calculus
Anyway.
works. I plugged in the numbers and this is what it spit out, but we can certainly follow up on that. Yeah, I don't know how the calculus in the.
Because it might be simpler, again, I'm thinking of myself out in the community trying to explain
Yeah.
this, it might be simpler to say, we've got 21 attorneys, we're gonna need 66 to comply.
Yeah.
Probably gonna mean a tripling of the budget, but I won't go there, it's just.
Right,
like,
and it-
that's a number that people can really latch onto.
Yeah, and so I think one of the reasons you see that spread in the low-high really depends on the salary ranges, right? So it's the starting salary of an inexperienced attorney that wouldn't be doing high felony work. They would be starting their career in a misdemeanor court, right? And so, but we'll certainly keep looking at that particular number. Again, I plugged in our FTEs, our salary ranges, and the caseloads, and this is what the formula sheet put out.
Also, keep in mind that this worksheet reflects salaries, probably benefits. It doesn't reflect what Patrick was talking about, that $8.8 million budget has indirect costs, it's got overhead, it's got other things that make up the 8 million. So if we were to compare these numbers to just what are the salaries for the attorneys, then you would see that kind of tripling effect, probably.
Probably.
Most likely.
Most likely.
Patrick would need the infrastructure to build that out.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so we'll get to work on
Again,
that, but
low, this estimate's on the low
this-
side.
yeah, and that, my messaging, if anything else today is, I think this is very conservative, and conservatively low. Okay, so maybe we'll move to the next slide. So what the spreadsheet asked us to do, obviously, is go into each division by, whether it's adult or juvenile, and report our 2023 cases. And so that's what we've done here. And so the way the formulas work is, if we started up in the left-hand corner here with the highlighted categories of cases, right? So again, as a refresher on what I presented off, I would also, Leonard, for your benefit as well, the new standards have these categories of cases. So felony life without the possibility of parole, felony murder, and sort of all the way down. And then you'll see the tight weight that's associated with each one of those representations and the projected number of attorney hours. And again, you're drawing down a caseload based on the maximum number of attorney hours in a given year, and developing a caseload based on the type of case, the assigned hours, and the maximum number of caseloads a year, workable hours in a year. So the highlighted red box is my review of cases assigned in 2023 to our office. Again, the asterisk caveat here is that there were some cases that our attorneys were appointed on as a new case in 2023, but they didn't have a 2023 cause number. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say a thank you to the goodwill of the prosecuting attorney's office and their business application tech that got me this data, because we couldn't get this data out of our e-defender system because we're not capable of doing that. So I want to publicly thank them for helping me make sure that we're working on the same page and that these numbers are the numbers that our office represented in 2023. So as you go down each category of cases, it produces the outputs in the spreadsheet. Again, that's where we start to get into how many more lawyers do you need. It's based on the inputs for the adult cases as follows. And so basically all the adult felony cases end at felony low with felony probation. And then our misdemeanor teams are the misdemeanor high, misdemeanor low, and misdemeanor probation cases. So it doesn't, the spreadsheet doesn't really distinguish that. There are adult cases, but two types of cases in two different courts, right? A lower court and a higher court, so to speak. So that puts the outputs of, again, number of attorneys we need based on the weighted system and what it would take, again, based on 2023 assignments to our department. And again, with the caveat there that that's, I believe, to be low. So, questions? Okay, we can move to the next slide, which is our juvenile cases. So in our juvenile division, we have two attorneys, and you'll see that based on, again, we went through, entered in our 2023 juvenile client, our cases in juvenile court. just, starting in next year, it takes our need to 3.5 attorneys. Again, we have 2, 4.5 in 26 and 8.5 in 27. Still not sure how you hire half a person, but we'll figure that out at some point. But you can sort of, at least in our juvenile court, appreciate some of the immediate impacts. And this is, so the attorneys also do other work, right? So in juvenile court, for example, we have 2 juvenile lawyers. Well, they do non-trial work, so as well as part of their work week. So there are cases that aren't reflected on here. So youth at risk cases, those types of cases, truancy cases, those aren't reflected on, in this spreadsheet, because again, we don't assign that individual client to an attorney. They represent them in court, but it takes up a chunk of hours of every week. So again, that's another asterisk here in terms of these are lower projections. And our other juvenile attorney, for example, represents all the defendants, their adult defendants at family juvenile court in child support enforcement, right? So part of their workload every week is X amount of hours a week doing child support enforcement, adult work, and juvenile criminal work. So again, that's not captured on here because that's just an hour reduction that we do to their workload. I don't need to get into the weeds on that, but just based on the composition of juvenile filings in 2023, those would be the projected needs of FTEs to phase in over the next 3 years for our juvenile division. Any questions? Okay, and then the last slide is support staff. So I have a couple, probably follow-up questions with WSAC. And actually, these spreadsheets were, I think, originally created by the Snohomish County Public Defender who shared them with WSAC. I think they developed them together. But I'll follow up with him, Jason Swartz, who I know well. But this sort of also, again, shows the impact of what we would need to implement and comply with the standards on the support side of public defense. So trial attorneys have to have, legal assistant, paralegal support to do their work. The standards speak to the ratios, and they get to a ratio of one support staff member for every 3 trial attorneys. And so that calculus is in here as well. And in the sort of peach boxes up to the left here, showing the FTEs needed, it also speaks to the investigator ratios and the social worker ratios that the standards would call for in 2028. They've delayed that implementation, as you can see. So there's that black box there represents a waiting period to fully implement for legal support over the next 3 years. But you can see the impacts of when fully adopted in 2028, the numbers that we would be looking at to get into compliance. That's pretty significant.
You've talked to the board many times about investigators.
Yes.
And, I have personal experience with that, so I really can understand where you come from. And so do these standards set new requirements for a number of investigators per attorney or per case that didn't exist before?
It was more permissive language previously. But yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the exact language now that they adopted. But it's basically the same principle that attorneys need to have X amount of investigators per lawyer. And so previously it was like 1 to 4.
So right now,
1 to 3.
Right now, we're not meeting,
No.
we're not meeting that, but you're saying we weren't like out of compliance because it was more of permissive. But that ratio may need to be not only increased, but caught up with where we're behind. We're not behind with lawyers right now, right? Like we're in compliance with our caseload standards because those are mandatory.
Correct.
But we're not in compliance with the suggestion about investigators.
Correct.
And those suggestions may be increasing commensurate with the lawyer increase and going from permissive to mandatory.
They are, yes.
Well, I think that's important
Yes,
to
that's an important
underscore
distinction.
because that's an area we're not in compliance with
Right.
what's being
Yeah,
suggested, even by the current caseload standards.
Right, so we currently have, so in the blue box there represents our current, the number column at the top there represents what our current staffing numbers are in those categories. So we have 16 support staff, we have 4 supervising attorneys, 12 legal assistants, we have 3 investigators for 21 trial attorneys, so that's not the 1 to 4 ratio. And we have two, soon to be two, in the summer, hiring our second social worker funded through TST. So, we will have a ways to go in 2028, needless to say on that. Okay, I think, yes, Commissioner McGinn.
I have two questions, kind of generally. My first question is, so we're looking just at the Public Defense Office right now, but do we know if this is going to impact any other offices or the courts, like where they're gonna come back and they're gonna be like, well, since there's more attorneys in public defense, there's gonna be more case files and we're gonna need more of this? Have those conversations taken place yet?
What's the ripple effect effectively, yeah?
Yeah, so I haven't had any conversations with the other stakeholders in terms of what implementation of the new standards would have on them. Obviously, it's going to be more physical bodies.
Great question, Patrick. When you said physical bodies, do you have the current space?
Yes,
to house
so,
this?
so great question, one that also gives me a lot of anxiety. So we're slated, in the construction proposal to move over into Building 4, and we did that spatial analysis. We tried to project, I think we started that process about 18 months ago. The last time I met with,
Project this.
we didn't project this. So, so we are going to have spatial issues. I don't think we're going to have, even with teleworking options, we're not going to have enough space in Building 4 in 2028 to have the number of staff members necessary.
Did WSAC ask for any, I know you said like, they're just talking about, the lawyers and the support. They're not even talking about the admin, and I'm assuming they're not talking about space and capital needs that have to go along with.
Right. No, none of that is in this exercise. But
Again,
it's-
other counties, it wouldn't be relevant necessarily to other counties who contract out.
Right.
So the WSAC's looking for across the state needs. I think though that it's important that when we talk to OPD directly, that we talk about all those other needs.
Yes. Right, and there's another need, which isn't captured here, which is conflict counsel expense. So as you know, we work with a host of outstanding contract attorneys that take legal conflict of interest representations, where we're prevented from representing an individual that's been appointed to us by the court because of a legal conflict of interest. So that attorney will represent that individual in their own solo practice. So another big caveat to expense here, which again, for me is equally as concerning for implementation, is contractor expense. And to put it bluntly, we are going to have to continue to contract with conflict attorneys. We legally can't represent everybody that the court assigns to our office because of ethical considerations. So our contractors are going to they have to comply with these standards as well. So every attorney in Washington that does indigent defense representations will have to certify, and then we certify every quarter to the state Supreme Court that we are, as officers of the court and licensed bar members, that we are complying with the indigent defense standards. And those are submitted and those are on file at the clerk's office in every county. And so our contractors are going to have to certify as well, saying, I'm not out of compliance with the new standards of public defense, which means I have to accept less cases every year to comply, but their compensation needs to be either commensurate or above what they're paying now. And that's a huge challenge for me. We're working on scheduling a meeting with them because this is, we were already in a hyper-competitive market in the pandemic for staff. It is whatever's more than hyper-competitive, whatever that is, that's where we're going to be in competing for not only staff attorneys and services, and staff to join our office, but then with contractors as well, right? So all our local contractors currently contract, they do public defense in Grays Harbor County, Lewis County with us. We are all going to compete against each other now we always have, but more exclusively. So again, sorry, Commissioner Yap.
No, you touched right on my point, which was like going to be the recruitment piece of things, right? Obviously, public defense attorneys are already on high demand, and this is just going to elevate that, right? And the recruitment piece of it is like, how are we, I guess, as counties, and I guess this is more a question for, at the forum, like, expected to recruit this, this increase in staff when there's already such a high demand across the state for these positions, and in some counties, they haven't been able to be filled. We've been very lucky to have our positions filled, but that wasn't the case just even a couple of years ago, or last year. I know we were struggling to like fill some of these positions. So the recruitment piece, I guess I'm gonna ask you, just from your perspective, like, what is going to be the impact for you, right? Trying to fill those positions
Sure.
across the board.
And I mean, just because it's a double whammy, I think you were getting at that. It's not only do you need more of them, because you can send fewer case to each attorney, but you're gonna have less, because I can tell you, many of those solo practitioners will close up shop. They will only be able to do it based on volume.
Right. So
And
we have
if
to
we pay
more.
the same rate, but they can take a third as many cases, they won't be able to make ends meet, and they'll, just like our crisis stabilization, because the Medicaid rates aren't high enough, they're just closing up shop, we're losing, like that same phenomenon is gonna happen. So you're needing more and you're gonna have less. So it's a double
Correct.
whammy.
It is a double whammy, and we're gonna have to pay more.
So you have to pay more, you have to pay way more.
And to be candid, our rate of compensation for lawyer work in this context is grossly and has been grossly inadequate. I'll say that, just candidly. And this is again to public defense funding, right?
I mean, as I've said before,
Yeah.
because I did it, it's so low that relative to what you pay for a private attorney, that it counts as pro bono work for the Washington State Bar Association. And I counted my
Yes.
work as my pro bono thing.
Right.
Because you were getting paid like 25% or less of what my market rate was.
And, our rates are just above what the average practitioner's overhead is, right? Your overhead rate is about $50 an hour. Well, if we're paying 60, you make $10 an hour being a lawyer. That's not a great rate. So you're right, like our juvenile contractors, they lose money, they do it because they love working with kids. I mean, if they're not making
I
money.
just did it, because I love the work, and I
Yeah.
did it as a fraction of I had other, higher paying clients.
Sure.
I always wondered, there are some practitioners in town that do almost all this kind of work, and I always wondered, how are they making ends meet? Like,
So we're working on that. I have some strategies. Again, I'm gonna meet with our contractors here in the next couple of weeks so we can have a candid conversation about the challenges, because they're seeing the same things in terms of how are we gonna make a living now if I have to take a third of what I used to take, but my necessary income for me and my family is Y. We're not gonna be able to change the Y, which again means we're probably gonna have, well, not probably, we will have more expense on that end of implementation as we're going to experience internally.
So your other area that's gonna increase is the line item that you contract out will most
Correct.
definitely increase, so that's yet another cost.
Yes.
Okay.
So you asked about the ripple effect, and while Patrick may not have spoken to the stakeholders, we know from the past that every time the board addresses the additional caseload the attorney needs in public defense, the prosecutor comes forward and says that he also needs more, and he has advanced the notion of caseload standards for prosecuting attorneys. And then the courts also have, just based on our experience over the years, when there's more attorneys or more officers, the courts need more to handle the cases. So we know it's going to have a ripple effect. The extent of that is what we don't know.
Certainly, I think you could forecast, higher number of calendars, right? Because there's gonna be more word defenders in there, so, and then physical space, right? So physical space, et cetera. But Commissioner Mejia, back to, your point, the question earlier, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this as a career public defender, which is to say that the current caseloads have driven people out of public defense for decades. It was this close to driving me out until I got appointed, just to be candid. After years and years and years of doing the work, I was burnt out. I was burnt out of getting, 12 new serious adult felony clients every month, rain or shine. You can only do that for so long. So to your point to recruitment and retention, this is a huge retention issue. Every year when we do our public defense surveys from exiting professionals, what's the number one reason you leave public defense? It's caseloads. If they're not sustainable to have a healthy work-life balance. And we haven't as a profession. It's been awful, to speak candidly. I mean, there's only so many consecutive weekends you can work till you have problems outside of your work life. So I think it's a huge retention. I can tell you, when I announced this in an all-staff to my staff, absent them seeing a bonus from the commissioners, which was greatly appreciated, I hadn't seen them light up like that in a long time. Not that they aren't lit up all the time, enjoying their work, but I mean, there's finally an end where I can have a reasonable caseload and have a good work-life balance. But I also think it's going to bring defenders back, right? So a lot of exiting law students that are passionate about being a public servant and doing public defense this is totally anecdotal for the record, I think have stayed away from public defense because the first thing they hear is, it's a great job, but your caseloads are going to crush you. They're crushing. And you can make X, or you can go to Perkins Coie and make Y, right? So I think it's a huge recruitment tool, and I also think defenders that left love the work, but for the caseloads may come back. Both anecdotal statements, but based on my experience and what I certainly hope. It is going to be a crisis because, again, we are going to be competing. But our competitive edge is Thurston County and our department. And we'll be attending our statewide public defender conference next week. We have 25 staff coming, and we have a great reputation in this state as a great public defender office to work in. So that's our sort of one competitive edge, but again, just as a profession, this is a huge competitive edge. I understand the shock of what this expense looks like. And I was shocked too. And I'm concerned about implementation, I'll be candid. But that's my administrative hat, which is my job. But okay, I'll stop rambling.
Just finished,
I'm finished.
I was going to say, based on kind of the new information that we have we worked that into the new plan of spacing needs? Like, have we started discussions of like, well, we need to reassess, right?
Building
Right.
5, yeah, we need to reassess
Because
what we're doing with buildings 5 and 6. It's we're just now getting these estimated numbers. This is
game changer.
so new. But we could sure look at what else we're doing in building 4, not a lot. I think we're moving everything else out.
Yeah, and so I will say that last time I met with the firm, I knew the study was completed, and so having colleagues on Council of Public Defense, knowing where this was going, I went through with the architect. We did, Tita and I did, saying take that space and cut it to 2. These standards are going to change. I'm going to need more staff. So we were able to stretch previously designated office space in Building 4 that was single occupancy into 2 because I knew these were coming. It's not going to be enough. I think I would have to look at that. now that I've done the projections, we'll go back and see how many actual confidential attorney office spaces we created. It's definitely not to the 2028 projections, so we will need some more space.
So it's highly likely, if we go down the path where the sheriff is not occupying building 5, that 5 is in better condition than 6, where you're currently at.
Agreed.
And while it's not ideal, I mean, part of the woo-hoo about the remodel was that we get all public
Yeah.
defense into a single building. We need to look and see if that building, if there's anything we can do. I think we moved everything else out. But if we didn't, we'll look and see what we didn't move out first. And if there's nothing else to move out and only public defense is in the entire building, then we look at 5 or 6 and see what we do there.
Yeah, happy to have that meeting if we're gonna schedule it. Again, we have these projected numbers. We can go back and take a look at the plans for building 4, how many spaces, because again, building 4 has the resource hub co-located there, and I can't remember what their footprint is, which we, very much supportive of, but now we're in a different spatial dilemma.
So it's another potential positive to having a new sheriff's building now rather than. Okay,
I think that's really,
we have, I was just wondering, Pat, do you have, like, I remember reading articles, like, not that long ago, I want to say 6 months ago, like in Oregon, there was like stuff going on where, like the public defender,
Yes.
maybe someone in your position was like, I'm not assigned, like, people
Yeah.
were just sitting in jail without an attorney.
Right.
I mean, it was a terrible situation, but they were forcing that issue of like, I don't have the funding for the attorneys to meet the standard. I can't ethically assign this, because if I assign this case to this attorney, it would be inadequate representation, because the caseload's too high, and they basically force the hand of the court.
yes.
And I can't remember how that all, do you know how that all
That
kind of?
you pretty much summed it up.
And then the
one of the-
what?
Well, how did it play out?
So
Well, because the
they had to
court-
revamp their entire system in Oregon. And that's what ended up happening. And we've seen that in Washington too. So like Yakima, for example, I'm good friends with the director there. They had an attorney shortage. And so, and Benton County as well. So either cases were getting dismissed because of a constitutional right, because once you're charged with a crime, right, your constitutional right to a speedy trial starts right then, and your constitutional right to an attorney starts right then. And if you don't have the attorneys to assign, then you have a constitutional violation occurring and with no remedy. And so that's what they've had to do in certain counties, to say, well, we can't assign this person an attorney because we don't have an attorney.
So the courts can, if they have
Compel the county to.
they can compel the legislature to act, because they can basically just start dismissing cases, and that's not politically tenable, right?
No,
Nobody
it's
wants to
not.
see just case, when,
No,
when,
and-
when judges start dismissing cases,
Well-
then someone's gonna do something.
And and so candidly, the situation, counties and and let's not forget our municipalities. These standards apply to municipalities as well, right? Yes, they do. So every municipality in the state has to comply with these standards. And I can tell you, the misdemeanor impact, and people, and this happens, we concentrate on, the big adult felony cases, right? The big ones that, make the news, et cetera. The overwhelming majority of cases is in misdemeanors, in district courts and municipal courts in the state of Washington. The volume is tremendous. And the standard changes for public defense for us and others in district courts is huge. It is a big change in the number of attorneys required to represent indigent defendants in misdemeanor courts. But my point is that with the significance to these changes and a path forward for support and funding, your point's well taken, Commissioner Menzer, is there should be wide bipartisan support to fund public defense with the obligations that counties and municipalities have to implement this, and it should be across the board, right? I don't want, even as a citizen, our law enforcement or our prosecutors' hands to be tied because there's not enough defenders to charge viable cases. That's not good policy. And so I think with the backdrop of these changes and our required compliance, and we don't want to be in a situation, we certainly as defenders don't want to be in a situation where clients are in jail and I can't give them a lawyer. I do not ever want to be in that situation. And so I think there should be even greater political will when local legislatures are hearing, if not funded, these are some of the consequences. And our law enforcement, certainly should have a voice in that. Our, prosecuting attorneys should have a voice in advocating, I think, in support, because of that could be the consequence. Is, well, I'm responsible for administering public defense. All my attorneys are officers of the court and their bar licenses on the line. I can't give them any more cases this month. And we're in week 2 of October, and we have 2 more weeks of new cases coming in. And so I put a secession on any assignments. So all those new arrests are going to go unassigned, and nobody wants to be in that situation.
On the flip side of that, though, while I can see where there should be political will of the legislature to fund public defense statewide, what we have heard all along is that counties have plenty of levy capacity. And that what we have, if our voters are so concerned, that they will vote to increase the taxes.
But that,
I know that that's a fallacy.
well, I mean, I just think that kind of fails when it's a so the voters can't vote to violate the Constitution. If there's constitutional mandates that have to be filled, the answer can't be, well, let's see if the voters decide they want to go abide by the Constitution. That doesn't work. Voters say, no, we still have the requirement, and so it has to go beyond just, oh, well, you've got a tool that you can ask the voters if they feel like it.
I do
That's not how
not
it works.
disagree with you. I am just saying that what I think we're going to face in the legislature is you have capacity, and as a county, we have choices in what we fund, and they will suggest that we shift funding to this. So I don't think it's going to be a slam dunk in the legislature. I think that we're going to resolve this in the courts.
Commissioner Fournier.
This may be a really dumb question, but not everybody gets a public defender, right? Some people get
Right.
private attorneys.
Yes.
What, if somebody just says, well, I'm not gonna hire my own, I want the public to pay for it, is that how it works? Or is that like, how is it determined if somebody is eligible or if, or do we do cost recovery?
So there's a specific statute that requires the court to screen a defendant for eligibility for public defense. So it's a confidential form that's submitted to all our courts for them to review whether or not they qualify and under the federal poverty guidelines or not, right? So juvenile society, every juvenile obviously they're per se indigent, right, because they're kids. But for the adult side, the court reviews those screenings, and then the court makes a determination based on that screening to appoint the public defender's office. You're eligible for the appointment of counsel. You want counsel to represent you at no expense at the public defender's office, which they're constitutionally entitled to, no expense, if they qualify, and then assigns our office. I mean, we get, in like adult felonies, for example, we're appointed in 94% of the cases. So the vast majority, and the district court is in the 80s, right? So we get the majority of the cases that come through our courts are folks that have been found to be indigent by the court.
And there's no cost recovery, there's no cost sharing, there's no.
No, because really at that point, they're either eligible or they're not. You either have the financial ability to retain your own counsel or not. And
We've looked
We've
in the
looked at it.
past at cost recovery models, and they're not effective.
yeah, and there's been a significant amount of legislative changes on legal financial obligations being placed on, because really your recovery rates are
Dismal,
dismal,
because
right?
they're
It's
indigent.
blood out of a turnip. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're on TANF, if you receive TANF benefits, you're presumed eligible, and, assigning a $250 cost recovery fee is just gonna stay on debt on the books for, in perpetuity unless it's wiped.
Okay, are we good to go?
Yeah, I'm certainly done. I will provide, Robin, I can send that directly to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The additional, expenses, again, they're gonna be rough
Quick
Loop and
clarifying
Robin,
question.
Leonard.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
In that salmon colored box, the
Yes.
25 and 26 support staff, there's negatives? Does that mean we currently have more staffing than?
That means we're good for now.
We're good for a couple of years, okay?
Yes, we're good for now. On case supervisors, we are good, because we stay in compliance, like
Okay. Just wanted to double check.
But then but the legal assistants, and investigators, those are blocked off, as deferring the expense to 2028.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
That's good.
Okay, next up, Commissioner items. We have 18 minutes before our session. Commissioner Mejia.
Thank you. Since we were talking about the Transvolta water rights, I was, we had this conversation last year and kind of were given like 3 different avenues, right? And we were gonna talk about funding for the 3 different ones. There's ones where we were supposed to do it, so I was hoping that we could possibly get an update on it, kind of like, what have the conversations been with Transvolta? Like, where are we at? Like, just an updated conversation on that, because it's been a while since we had that, and
Might be something we have to put on a future request for a future briefing.
yeah.
We'll put a briefing together and come back to you with,
Because, yeah, it has been a while since we heard about that.
connect with the team, and then we'll figure out how much time we need to bring the briefing back.
Okay, very good. Any other commissioner items for this morning? Up there? Nope. Okay, we're back for commissioners check-in. We'll have another opportunity at 2 p.m. So I guess for this morning we'll be adjourned.